All right, well, welcome to the afternoon session. Thanks for coming back from lunch. Okay, so I want to introduce Cather Simpson. She's a New Zealand American physics chemistry academic and entrepreneur. I'll keep that in mind. She's currently a professor at the University of Auckland, which is the joint appointment between the physics and chemistry departments. We heard a little bit about where's chemistry, where's physics coming in, and quantum. She's the founder of the Photon Factory Laser Lab at the University of Auckland, and co-founder of 3 photonic startup companies. And she's going to talk, I think, a little bit about at least one of them. And she sits on the board of Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, New Zealand, as New Zealand's largest technology company, as well as on the Dodd Walls Center for Photonic and Quantum Technologies, which we just heard about. She's a vice president of SPIE, the International Society for Optics and Photonics, and has a strong focus on teaching, mentoring, and public outreach, and is an outspoken advocate for issues of gender equality and ethics in science. She has also taken a strong interest in the role of universities in sparking innovation and economic benefit, with a particular focus on using light-based technologies to make agriculture more efficient and sustainable. So all the things we've been talking about. And her talk title is, What Do Agriculture and Quantum Technologies Have in Common? So I think we're gonna play her video, and then she's online. She'll answer questions for us. So please go ahead and start the video.
Hi, my name's Cather Simpson, and I'm at the University of Auckland and also CEO of a startup company called Orbis Diagnostics. I'm here to talk to you today about what agriculture and quantum technologies have in common. Now, that's a kind of weird title, which I realized when I sat down to write the talk. I hadn't really meant to talk about that. I had sort of meant to talk about how quantum technologies can help with agriculture, how it can be used. I've sort of asked the question, you know, what do a fish and a piano have in common? But let's explore it a little bit. So what does Google say? Well, Google says that agriculture and quantum technologies actually do have a lot in common. So both are focused on optimizing resource utilization, enhancing efficiency. And when you think about quantum technologies and agriculture, you can kind of immediately, when you're thinking about it in that frame of mind, you can think about improving crop yields, resource management, supply chain logistics. You can also think about optimizing agriculture to help remediate climate or to even help model the climate change. And then you can think about doing genetic research. So there's quite a lot actually that the two of these have in common. If you then continue, so we'll continue on this kind of AI Google pathway, let's look at what the world thinks about quantum technologies and agriculture. And it thinks things like this, right? So you're going to revolutionize precision agriculture with quantum technology and GPS. That looks really futuristic, doesn't it? I highly recommend Pharmanaut if you're interested in this topic at all. They have some really out there images, but they also do quite a lot about writing articles and things. Here's another one. This is from another source. This is Seed Today. And here we're developing quantum computing as a strategic factor for agriculture in Brazil. So that one actually looks a little bit threatening, like you're going to shoot DNA into the ground with some massive machine. But that's a picture of a quantum computer. A few others: cultivating innovation, quantum technologies in agriculture, quantum computing in Indian agriculture, a leap towards hyper-efficient farming with a nice big exclamation point. These are all very futuristic ideas. The images that you're getting are about tomorrow, and they're about, you know, people with iPads and screens and plants in the background. And that's all fantastic. But it looks very much like, you know, quantum computing is quantum technologies, and that's in the future. But we're people in the world who grow food today, and agriculture is very, very much needs improving today. So let's take a step back a little bit and look at quantum technologies in general and how quantum computing fits into that, and how agriculture then can benefit from the types of things that quantum ideas, that the translation of quantum ideas into practical use can bring to agriculture. So actually, quantum technology is a whole lot more than just quantum computing. Quantum technology is also today. People have been using quantum technology for a very long time. In fact, a lot of things that people were doing in the 1700s, even in ancient times, were quantum phenomena. They just didn't know it. So I'm going to highlight a couple of areas in my talk today. I am going to talk a little bit about quantum computing in agriculture with a very kind of practical set of experiments or research project. And then I'm going to talk a lot about the middle one, more about sensing and imaging. So sensing and imaging is just kind of a fancy way to talk about spectroscopy. There are quantum sensing methods, but anybody who's measured a spectrum of a material has made a quantum measurement. Both the light is quantized and the transitions that are in the things that you're measuring are quantized. Imaging the same way. Everything in an image, especially if you're talking about a digital image where you now have pixels, that itself is quantization both on the creating the image and detecting the image side of things. And of course, we all use GPS today, and that's based on quantum clocks. So there's a lot of research going on in quantum clocks and how that kind of technology can be used to give you more precision around your farming. I'm actually not going to talk very much about quantum clocks at all today. I'm mostly going to talk about the quantum sensing and imaging, and a little bit about quantum computing. And then I'm going to talk about that little bitty three-letter word, which is the et cetera part, because quantum can be used for a lot of interesting things that don't really fall neatly into all of these boxes. Oh, I should make my screen full screen. Let's do that. Okay. Ooh, I hope my face isn't blocking. Maybe I'll block my face off for the next several slides. One of the areas that is being researched in places like Australia and many other places, but the example I'm going to use is in Australia, is quantum computing for agriculture, for the biosciences. So QBIC is the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence in Quantum Biotechnology. And Warwick Bowen is the director, Helena Rubinstein Dunlop is the deputy director, and they're doing all sorts of exciting things in the quantum space. I'm just going to highlight one project in that space right now. One of those projects is about fertilizer. So fertilizer is made by something called the Haber-Bosch process. $100 billion go into making fertilizer every year. It is an essential component of current agriculture all around the world. But it's also very dirty, it's very expensive, it uses a lot of energy to manufacture, and it generates a lot of global methane. Use of fertilizer also degrades the environment if you overuse it, and it kind of throws agricultural systems out of whack if you're not paying enough attention. And so when governments try to ban fertilizer, you can see there is a problem in Sri Lanka when the government banned certain types of fertilizer. It really causes problems because we've come to rely on high quality fertilizers for our food productivity. One of the things they're doing at QBIC is using quantum computing to design more effective fertilizers. So how can we understand when we put fertilizer on a crop to make it grow more effectively, to make it grow faster, or effectively we're adding nitrogen or phosphorus and other things into the system. That's being taken up by the roots, which you can see on the far right here. But that whole process, how all of that works, is understood in a fair amount of detail now. And what we can do is apply the unique aspects of quantum computing to try to design the features of that system better so that we no longer have to rely on nitrogen fertilizers produced in the Haber-Bosch process. So this is a really interesting application. It is a future application of quantum technologies. They're doing research on that and on many, many other things at QBIC. And if anybody is interested, I highly recommend that you go to QBIC's website or search up Helena Rubinstein Dunlop. She's got a very unique name. Email her, and I'm sure she'd be happy to talk to you in more detail about what QBIC and Australia in general is doing in the quantum space. They're doing quite a lot. The second area I want to talk about focuses more on what's going on in New Zealand. I'm just highlighting, as I said, this happens all over the world. I'm just highlighting some of the things that are going on in New Zealand's research space at what's called the Tafai Au Dodwall Center for Photonic and Quantum Technologies. Frederic van Holsbeek is the director. David Hutchinson and Keith Gordon are both in the center. David runs what is called Aotearoa's Quantum Technologies, or Quantum Technology Aotearoa, and Keith Gordon is the guy who runs a lot of our industry-facing projects. He's the deputy director industry, and so he sort of oversees all of those. Now, a lot of what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes is looking at quantum sensing and imaging. And so that is basically the idea of using the quantum properties of light and the quantum properties of matter. You interact them with one another and you get information and wisdom out of that that allows you to do other things. So to be clear, the Dodwall Center does a lot of research in quantum technologies and, of course, photonic technologies as well. And that research underpins, so they're doing things in the quantum computing space, they're doing things in the quantum clock space, so not just quantum sensing. That's actually really important for most research centers that are in this space trying to do applications, including QUBIC. Because what you want to be able to do is build the expertise in your team to then grow up what you need to be able to apply the research outward. And so I want to make it really clear that both of these centers and most centers that are doing quantum technology development also do a lot of really fundamental research across all facets of quantum science. But one example I want to highlight from the Dodwall Center is the intelligent processing of fish biomass. So it turns out that new sustainable technologies can be developed by improving the use of byproducts and bycatch using quantum sensing. So the picture in the middle is actually a quantum sensor for fish waste or fish byproducts in general. So you catch your harvest, you process the fish, and there's a lot of really useful stuff that is left over that people don't eat as a fish and chips. So there's a lot of large proteins that are biomedical scaffolds, omega-3s, anti-aging peptides, things like collagens, enzyme polymers, and so on. And what the Dodwall Center is working with the marine industry, the marine harvesting industry, to develop laser spectroscopic methods that detect the composition of marine products in real time in various stages of the processing to guide that smart extraction. So that's just one of the projects that's going on in the Dodwall Center in the quantum sensing space. Another project is one that actually came out of my lab. I'm part of the Dodwall Center, but I run or used to run a laboratory called the Photon Factory. And this one relies on the fact that milk is a complex fluid. So it has over 10,000 components in it, and being able to understand and guide and direct what components show up in milk based on the cow's genetics, but also on what they eat, can really guide a farmer in increasing the productivity of his or her herd using quantum technologies. So one of the projects that we worked on in my lab was led by Dr. Michelle Nieuwoud, was to work with milk export or importers, exporters, the milk industry essentially, to use spectroscopy, detailed compositional spectroscopy, to evaluate milk composition. And what that allows you to do is dig down and understand, in this case, what cows are eating. So you're seeing a bunch of cattle being that are eating palm kernel. Oh, goodness, those four-letter words, that are eating palm kernel as a supplement to their normal feed. This is not good for the environment, the places where palm kernel is grown, and it's also not, it's not great if you're advertising that your dairy farm is pasture-based. That being said, it's really important to supplement cows' feed so that they're healthy and they're productive. So there's a balance here. So one of the things that Fonterra has introduced is using this kind of technology, this spectroscopy, to analyze milk. And one of the things that they grade farmers on now is a particular compound that shows up in the milk and can be picked out if you're using this kind of quantum sensitive spectroscopy. You know, it's picking out the quantum behavior of one of these molecules. And by that, I just mean everybody in the audience probably knows that an absorption spectrum comes from quantum mechanics. An infrared spectrum or a Raman spectrum comes from the quantum behavior of the molecule and the interaction of that molecule with light. And so that kind of spectroscopy can identify the use of this palm kernel supplement, looking for particular components in the milk. So that's just another example of how quantum sensing is being used today to improve productivity, but also improve performance. Now, the lab that I ran was called the Photon Factory. I started that in the University of Auckland in New Zealand, and it was designed to use exotic laser pulses for fundamental discovery, but also to help high-tech industry. And very early on, we began working with the Ministry of Primary Industries and with the primary industry environment within New Zealand and beyond. So we've done quite a number of projects here that I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about. What I'm really going to focus on are a couple of the weirder ones. So I said that when people think about quantum technologies, they think about quantum computing. That's the one that you've got all the futuristic sensors, the futuristic images of. You've got quantum sensing and imaging. That can be everything from spectroscopy to much, much more exotic types of sensing and imaging. Most of what I talked about today was some very clever, high-quality spectroscopy. And then there's the quantum clocks and GPS, which we all use, and I think we all know that the quantum technology is needed. That has its applications in agriculture, mostly through precision farming. I am now going to focus on that et cetera piece. So the first et cetera I'm going to focus on is a project that we did in the Photon Factory starting around 2011, which was about sorting sperm by sex for the dairy industry. So most dairy cattle are inseminated artificially. That's done through straws of semen that's been collected. And what you're actually doing is trying to develop genetic gain within your dairy herd so that you can make your herd more productive. So there's a lot of, I've occasionally made jokes about how sperm cells themselves are quantized. So you're actually measuring the X, whether a sperm cell is bearing an X chromosome or a Y chromosome, and their individual particles, you're measuring them one at a time. So in some sense, you're doing a quantum measurement. But the measurement and sorting of these cells actually happens through the employment of a lot of quantum ideas. So anything from measuring the spectrum of the DNA content of the sperm cell to using the interaction between light and matter to communicate a force to that sperm cell. So you're looking on the right at a picture of, it's an older picture of the lab on a chip implementation of sperm sorting in our laboratory. Why would you want to do this? Well, if you look on a plot, this is a plot of 2027, the projection towards 2027 of whether you will have more cows or higher productivity per cow. And you can see for India, which has the largest herd right now, India is projected by 2027 to have grown its footprint of cattle, dairy cattle and beef cattle. China is expected to have shrunk its footprint, but increase the productivity. So you can think of these axes as milk per cow and number of cows. And if you're able to sort semen by sex, then you can take your high-producing your cows, breed them against high-quality dairy bulls, and essentially shift your dairy herd's productivity in this direction up towards the upper left, which is what you really want to do. The world needs to have fewer cows making more milk. So milk is an awesome food source, but it's also really difficult on the environment. It's quite challenging. And so you'd love for your cows to be more productive. So that would allow us to reduce the size of our herds while still growing the production of milk. That would be a win. So that's why you do this. We spun out a company. And that company won a bunch of awards. And then in 2018, it was acquired by an animal genetics firm. It's still going strong. And up here, I'm showing you a little bit of the data that we acquire when we're separating these types of cells one from another. So this uses microfluidics, and it uses a lot of light matter interactions, quantum interactions, to look at X-bearing cells versus Y-bearing cells. So the difference in the fluorescence intensity of these two cells once they've been stained for DNA content is very small, but it is measurable. And by using some clever physics, we can separate the two and then collect only these ones, put those in the straws, and then dairy farmers can improve the quality of their herd. The second et cetera project I'm going to talk about is one that's very globally important, and that is the collapse of honeybee hives. So honeybees are incredibly important crop pollinators, and you can see just from this snapshot from 1946 to 2006 that there has been a massive decline in the number of honeybee hives around the world, and one of the main causes for this hive collapse is a parasite called varroa mite. You can see one right here on the back of a honeybee. These varroa mites latch onto honeybees outside the hive. They come into the hive when the honeybees go back in, and then they get into the larva, and they basically suck all the fat out and kill the larva and kill the hive. The hive collapses. And this is a crisis. So, newspapers and articles are written about this. And we decided we wanted to do something about that. So this is relatively new technology. We're still in the early prototype stage, but what we have done is use the fact that the honeybee and the varroa mite have very different quantum signatures. They're quite different quantized signatures. So, and that's again a spectroscopic measurement. And then we use the fact that they're going to interact with light in very, very different ways. So this project is about using lasers to eradicate varroa mites at the beehive, and then without using miticides or pesticides, which is the only way to cure a hive or save a hive at the moment. This would allow beekeepers to keep their hives healthy without damaging the environment or getting chemicals into their honey and things. So this is a very promising project. It's at very early stages. It's definitely in that et cetera space. This is not a quantum computing project, although I have to say it does use artificial intelligence and quite a lot of clever visualization and tracking in order to be able to do what it does. So I think, I hope anyway, that what I've told you in this short little talk is that quantum technology has a very bright future for advancing technology. So quantum computing, quantum sensing and imaging, and all of the other quantum clocks and GPS, et cetera, is definitely driving us towards a higher productivity, lower impact agriculture sector, which is fantastic. But the question is, why do we care? Is this just, high-tech physicists who are, solving the Schrodinger equation, sitting around going, hey, how could we apply this to technology? Or is there something deeper here? Well, I mean, I think I'm talking to the, speaking to the choir here, preaching to the choir, when I say that there is definitely a need for advancing agriculture. We need new technologies to help drive agriculture forward. So the world population growth, of course, it's slowing down, but that doesn't mean that it's not growing. The rate has changed, the annual growth rate is changing, but the population itself is going up. So we're looking at slowing down the rate at which we're increasing, but we're still talking about, 11 billion people by 2100. And every one of those people is someone who wants to eat food, right? So, we have to be able, if we're going to grow at this rate, we have to be able to feed those people. And we have a bit of a crisis in agriculture. There is not enough land to feed the future. And of the land that we have, a lot of it is degraded due to agriculture, intensive agriculture, the use of those fertilizers that I talked about, the overgrowing and the stripping of nutrients out of the ground. And so we have to do something in this space. And so I think quantum technologies provide a very powerful, very exciting pathway that might allow us to make a step change in the way that we produce our food in terms of its, the amount of food per hectare of land, but also in the impact that we have on that land and our ability to feed the world sustainably. Now, a final thought. So quantum technologies are being developed in many of the wealthier parts of the world. It's an expensive type of science. I just showed you some examples of New Zealand and Australia, and there's tons going on in Europe, there's tons going on in the USA. All over the world, people are developing quantum technologies. However, we will not realize the benefits of quantum technologies fully unless we have a more globally diverse, equitable, and inclusive approach, both to developing the quantum technologies and to deploying them. And so I think this is a really important final thought that I would like to leave you with. Thank you.
Oh, thanks very much, Cather. And thanks for getting up so early in the morning. I'm going to open it up for questions. But before I get the first question, I think you're there with Joe Shaw. And I remember Joe telling me that the honeybee, speaking about your honeybees, that honeybees were also very useful for discovering unexploded landmines. And the way you do that is you feed them a little bit of the explosive in their food, and then they go out looking for more. And they use LIDAR, which I think at least they use as a laser. and you find the bees and you find the landmines. Anyway, that's another thing. There's lots of things if you have a creative approach, I think. And what you said about the just growing your research team, I think resonates very well here. So, questions? Okay, I got one right here.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you, Prof Simpson, for the wonderful presentation. And I personally loved your concluding remarks on a globally inclusive, equitable, sustainable approach to that. I'm curious to find out, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I did realize that your approach to applying quantum technologies in agriculture is via photonics, for the sensing, quantum sensing, right? Great. So I was curious to know why you would prefer photonics for your sensing-based approach and not, for instance, the superconducting approach that is existing. Why so? And if maybe there are any major advantages to that, how can you encourage us as Africans or here as Ghana to participate? And how can we carry out simple projects using this sensing-based approach to also model some of these advantages in our context? Thank you very much.
A great question, thank you. And I'll start by apologizing. My computer crashed in the middle of all of that, so it was a good thing we did it by video. So I'm actually on a different computer than the one that I started with. So I missed a little bit there. Yeah, thank you very much for that question. It's a very challenging thing to do to make quantum technologies, particularly the development of quantum technologies, equitable and inclusive, because at the moment we're at the front end of the development of that technology, and so a lot of the exploration and even the early implementation is quite expensive. So, you know, I sat on the advisory board of the Robinson Institute here in New Zealand, which is a high temperature superconducting institute, looking at the types of sensing that you're talking about, also developing new types of engine technology that is a lot cleaner than the combustion engine for things like flight and so on, and space travel. And so I think the best way at the moment for Africa to participate, and by that I mean the continent. So I'm not, you know, of course there are massively successful research programs in Africa. So I'm not talking about the places where you've got like a university or a center and you've got all of the resources to do the research yourselves. But I'm talking about just the continent in general. How do we get more participation? Is to actually go to those places and participate in the research in those places and bring that technology back. Now, photonics, which is sometimes we, like I said in my talk, we think about quantum and photonics as almost separate, distinct things. Actually, photonics is a type of quantum technology. It exploits quantum technology all over the place. I like photonics myself for many applications. It's my area of expertise, but I also really like it because it's already relatively easy to use. You can build a really nice high quality sensor with parts that you can get from, a hardware store or supermarket or Amazon. And so a lot of the things that we do ourselves to try to solve these problems, there's almost always a price point that we're trying to stay underneath. Beekeepers are not going to spend $50,000 per hive for a very sophisticated solution to the varroa mite problem, for example. And so we're often looking for things that, by their very nature, are relatively easy to democratize or decentralize. I'm not sure if that answered your question very well. It's a great question, and it's a really big challenge.
Right, thank you very much. And please, can you recommend a learning path for anyone, maybe in high school, in tertiary, to get them into this field of application as well?
So many of the centers of research excellence around the world have, they're often funded through education rather than through research or through some combination of education and research initiatives in countries. And they almost all have diversity as part of their metrics for success. So I would encourage you to reach out to someone like Helena Rubinstein Dunlop, whose picture was on the screen for the Australian Center, or Frederic van Holsbeek in the Dodd Wall Center, or me. If you reach out to me, I'll connect you with the right people. And be a bit entrepreneurial when you're thinking about where you might like to go. And so, if you reach out and you say things like, I attended a seminar in Ghana, I got very interested in quantum technologies, I would love to have some opportunity to explore that, or I have skills, I have a degree, so you want to use a little bit at the front that talks about and is tailored to their center. Then you're much more likely to get a response. And if you come through somebody like Joe or me or some of your colleagues there, so that they can give you a kind of introduction, you're also more likely to get a response. But we almost always have these sorts of metrics where we report on our ability to bring in students from underrepresented groups.
Okay, here's another question.
Hi, thank you for the wonderful talk. You've talked about milk. So milk is a very complex mixture. So is there a particular marker that you're looking for in milk? And do you specifically look at some kind of spectroscopy, for example, Raman spectroscopy for milk? And the second question is that one of the biggest crises that humanity faces these days is, not to speak of access to food and water, but the quality of water itself. So would some of these ideas also extrapolate to ascertaining water quality?
That's a terrific question, thank you. So I'll answer the first one first. We tend to solve problems using whatever technology looks best for solving the problem. And with one caveat that my own expertise and the expertise of most of the people in my group is light matter interactions. So we tend all of the, I've started 3, almost 4 companies now, and every single one of them hinges on the knowledge of light matter interactions. So that's why many of our solutions are in that photonic space. For milk, you're right, milk is a very complex fluid, over 10,000 components. There are a couple of ways to do this, and we do this actually for melanoma as well. You can use, this is one of those places where artificial intelligence, machine learning works extremely well. So you get a very, very complex mixture of peaks in your vibrational spectrum, whether that's Raman or infrared. We tend to use Raman because milk is filled with water, and so we don't want to see all of that complication. And you can do pattern recognition to identify adulterants. So we've done projects with milk, particularly, I don't know if you remember when there was a scare about additives, melamine being added to milk because it boosts it boosts what looks like your protein content, which is what many farmers get paid on. So people were adding melamine to milk and it was killing children. So, we've worked on projects where you identify melamine, because, using that kind of pattern recognition. Then once you identify which peaks show up in your machine learning, you can go back and say, that's a melamine peak, or that's in this case, we're looking at a certain, for the PKA project, it's a certain type of fatty acid. So it's got a certain chain length. But we didn't start out looking for that. We started out by collecting a whole bunch of data, doing an analysis, and then looking at what came out of that analysis. And so that's how that many of those projects go. Sometimes you never get to where you know what's causing the pattern. So, for example, we have a startup company that's using very similar technology to diagnose skin diseases. So New Zealand is the melanoma capital of the world, but there are lots and lots of skin diseases and skin aging and all sorts of things that you can measure using things like Raman spectroscopy. And then a lot of that is simply doing the machine learning that gives you the pattern recognition to correlate what you're seeing in these very complicated spectra. Eventually, you go back and you identify what the components are, but in the first instance, what you really care about is whether that mole needs to come out or not. And so you can do that in multiple ways. And now I've forgotten what your second question was. I talked too long.
It was about water quality.
Oh, water quality. Yes. So when I was an assistant professor at Case Western Reserve University in the U.S., I heard the guy who got the Nobel Prize for the buckyball, I heard him give a talk. And it was a fantastic and inspiring talk. And he put up the 10 biggest problems that are facing the world. And they were things like water quality, food, access to food. There was a lot about politics and other disease, So there were 10 of these. And you're absolutely right. Water quality and access to high quality or quality water is a really important problem. He inspired us to work the way that we do, which is to identify a problem first and then collect the team around it that you need to solve it. So you come up, if we were going to do water quality, yes, almost all of the things that we've talked about can be used for water quality. So we did have a project for a while looking at that. The postdoc who was running that project has since left. There he was trying to evaluate wastewater at the end of its stream to make sure that it was healthy again. There are many, many solutions. We have a very simple type of project that it goes out on Marae here in New Zealand, and it works with iwi, so the Maori community, our indigenous population, who have a way to think about water that's a little bit differently than we do. So you think about water as it cleans itself, and it goes up and down according to the tides and so on. So that project links that kind of indigenous knowledge with some interesting chemistry to look at things like fertilizers runoff in waterways, which is a big problem in a place like New Zealand, where the primary industry is dairy farming is such a big part of our economy. So yes, you can apply these things. You can do it very simply, and you can do it in very, very complicated ways as well.
All right. Thanks, Cather. So, by the way, thank you for connecting photonics and quantum, even though it's perhaps is obvious. But Ghana was also very instrumental in getting the International Year of Light 10 years ago. And then we were talking about the enabling, photonics being an enabling technology throughout the world, but also looking forward to a century of photonics. And it's nice to understand that we're really not talking about completely separate things here when we're celebrating quantum. We're just adding in maybe some quantum information and a few things like that. So anyway, but a wonderful talk, and really wonderful, and you really hit a lot of points. And so I'd like to, you got one, okay, I got one question. Sorry, they won't let you go.
All right,
okay,
so
please.
Thank you very much. So I am not a science biased person, so forgive me if my question is a bit off. Now, I didn't hear you talk about the application in crop production. You did talk about it in animal production, that is to increase the milk yield from the cattle. Well, now, whole technical university where I work, our robotics team designed this robot that is able to scan the soil to be able to gather data from the soil. We have the prototype on display here. Now, how can we apply this technology in this kind of robot that collects data from the soil? It's able to tell you the nutrient combination, it's able to tell you the moisture content of the soil, gives you the data, and then you are able to tell the kind of crop you can do on that land that will give you the best yield possible. So how can we apply this technology in such a robot to ensure that, Ghana, we are maximizing the land space that we have? Thank you.
That's a great question. Yeah. So a lot of the technologies that I talked about are employed in sensing systems similar to what you're describing with the robotics. In fact, I was talking to a company here that is using those sorts of robots in wineries. So they're using those robots to drive down the rows of the wineries and assess the quality of the growth of the product rather than the quality of the soil. We've worked on projects at the early stages about looking at pasture quality. So rather than soil quality, which I find, if I were to think about developing a project using this kind of quantum and photonics for soil, I would have to learn a lot about how soil, what the markers are in soil. I'm a lot more comfortable thinking about what the nutrient content of the pasture is, of what's growing on the soil, right? But you can certainly use those types of methods for that. Now, I'm not sure if there are people in the room, but I know SPIE, our current president, Peter de Groot, has been working with a group in Ghana to set up a photonic center. So you do have that growing group. If you're in the room, I wish you all the best. It's an exciting time, and if you're not, then maybe some of you guys could find out who they are and look them up. Again, if you flick me an email, then I can send you the contact information if you don't know who those folks are. But yeah, I think that's a great idea. That's a great project, and anything that you can do that moves farming away from being a manual endeavor where you're out, like my grandfather was, digging in the ground to plant things, into something where you've got technology, and importantly, you've got the kind of technology that attracts our young people, that will benefit farming as well. Because one of the other problems that we don't talk about as often is that farming struggles now, family farms, it's really hard to pass it on to the next generation. There are fewer and fewer people who want to go into farming. And so, I've talked to some people in the innovation space who think about, if you can do farming from an iPad screen, you're a lot more likely to attract a 16 or 17-year-old into farming than if you hand them a hoe. And so, all of that is a really positive thing, I think.
Okay, thank you. In fact, I just saw a demonstration out in the hallway on doing farming with an iPad. So let's thank you again, Cather, for a really wonderful talk, and thank you for taking the time to actually share your experience and knowledge with us. Really, thank you. And let's thank Cather again.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Our pleasure. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Joe. I think it's been insightful discussion so far.